Okay, people. So today I am joined by Graham Cantwell, Katie McNeice, and Amy-Joyce Hastings. And we're going to be talking about their new film, right? Who We Love. So, guys, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate that.
Thank you for having us.
Awesome. Now, this film, like it spins out of a short, I believe.
Yes.
Um, so when making the short, did you always know that you wanted to turn that into a feature?
Actually, no. And there was a kind of a conversation after the short was finished with Alan Fitzpatrick, who's one of the producers who also produced the short, where he kind of had to convince me to make a feature film out of the short film. And it was because I thought the short film worked in
Mm,
and of itself, and it told a story, and it was kind of a little microcosmic piece of the world, and it did what it was supposed to do. Um, but we one of the things we found when we were traveling the world at film festivals and stuff with short film was it was connecting with people, young people particularly, and it was resonating. And Alan made the point to me: if you can connect to so many people with a short film, imagine how many more people you could connect with a feature film, with something that was told on a bigger scale, on a broader canvas. And it took a while for us to figure out how to develop the short into a feature, how to expand it without it seeming or feeling bloated, if you know what I mean, like a
mm,
bloated version of the short. But once we kind of figured out how to do that, which in the main involved delving into storylines with some of the support characters in the short film and expanding their worlds and their stories and their backgrounds. Once we figured out how to do that, then it felt like a very natural process to turn it into a feature film at that point. Um, Sorry,
right.
Gwen.
No, no, no. Go,
Oh
go.
yeah,
Keep going.
sorry. So once I had an idea for the structure for the narrative, I sat down and bashed out a first draft, and it was very rough, very loose. And I went looking for a partner to co-write it with me, because I wanted to have somebody on board who could bring an authenticity to it, who could bring a perspective that I didn't have, as a, let's say, slightly more mature um, male, straight male, writing about a young queer female character. Um, I wanted to have somebody on board with me who had that lived experience.
Mm,
So I went out looking for a co-writer, and I auditioned a lot of different people. And it took a while, but eventually I was lucky enough to find Katie, and the two of us worked on the film from that point, worked on the script from that point, and it became, initially the kind of the impetus was to have somebody on board to bring a level of authenticity to it, as I said, but it very quickly turned into a far more collaborative project where the two of us were really working in tandem, and Katie brought a whole lot more to it than just what I had anticipated. So it was a lovely experience, probably one of the most rewarding of my artistic career, working with Katie on the film. And it kind of developed and grew, and even over the course of making the film. And we when we shot the film, we went into post production, and we were about to do our pickups, and COVID happened,
mm.
and we were shut down for a year. But having that year allowed myself and Katie a lot of time to reflect on what we had gotten and what was missing. And just having Katie there as a collaborator, even in that stage of it, was so rewarding and fundamental to the film becoming what it did become.
Right. Okay. So, Katie, from your point of view, how did this all work, right? How did you hear about the opportunity? Like, had you worked as a co-writer before?
No, this was my first feature project actually. So like Graham approached me initially about this. It was really casual. I just got a message on Facebook saying, "Hey, listen, I'm looking for a co-writer. Your name has come up a couple of times. Could you send me some samples to, his email address?" And I think what Graham hadn't realized at the time, he realized it soon after, is that I'd been working for IFTN before that, the Irish Film and Television Network. So I'd actually been interviewing these two about the short. While it was on its festival run, and I
Right.
ushered them onto the red carpet at the IFTAs and everything. I was doing the social media, so I was very aware of what the original short was, who Graham was, who the original cast were. A lot of them have carried through into the feature film, like Amy-Joyce here, who plays Oonagh. And so it was a very casual introduction. And I was at the stage of my career where I was working kind of film jobs and events, and I was really immersing myself into the scene in Dublin. And I was writing a lot, but I hadn't gotten to the point yet where I had written something that had been finished. I also didn't know at the time that I wanted to be a director. I was very much in the kind of the baby stages of my career. So when Graham approached me and we started to write Who We Love together, I was also writing my first short film, which I went on to direct. So I was learning everything. I learned a lot from Graham as a director, even in the notes that he would give me on my writing. It was a lovely opportunity, which I actually haven't heard of anyone else, even at the level that I'm at now, who's been brought onto a project like that. As Graham said, like almost like a consultant. But to be given so much free reign and to be given the space to say, this is my opinion. I love this part. I love that part. As a young queer person, that doesn't quite ring true. And I think you're going in a lovely direction here, but I would actually veer left. Or I think this particular topic, I think Graham wouldn't mind me saying there was an element of sexual assault at one point in a very early draft. And I said, like, I love that you're talking about it, but that doesn't belong in this film. It needs to be something in and of itself. And I was listened to, which was a very rare thing. I hadn't had that happen yet. And I'm really grateful that that continued throughout the whole project because, like, I'm on the board of directors for the Writers Guild of Ireland. And one of the things that keeps cropping up again and again with our own members is that a writer will have a script, whether they've co-written it or not. And the second a director becomes involved, the writer gets kind of cast aside. And that very much didn't happen on Who We Love. Like I was involved throughout the whole process, like with the shoot, and then Graham and I, as he said, like got to collaborate again throughout the pickups and stuff as well. So it was lovely as for a first feature project to be involved from start to finish and to be listened to. Although that sounds like it should be standard, it was a really rewarding experience. I think I really lucked out in that regard.
Man, yeah. No, that sounds great. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? To get that opportunity and that level of, cooperation and appreciation
Mhm.
definitely is something that not everyone gets. So that's nice.
But
That's
it's
nice.
like if I could just jump in, Kevin, it's like Katie's almost making out like it was such a big gift that I gave to her. I got as much, if not more, out of the collaboration as Katie did. And it's something that when I'm talking to young filmmakers or even, peers, contemporaries, I would encourage people to do it more. Especially if you're going to be a director on a piece that you're writing, to have another voice in your head gives you perspective, gives you distance, gives you a kind of an objectivity that you wouldn't get if it's just you all the
Mm,
time. It becomes a kind of a singular thing. But it was great to have Katie as a sounding board, as a kind of to challenge my ideas, to all of it. So I definitely got the better of it.
yeah. Um, one quick question though, Graham. Right. So you were looking for that different viewpoint with the feature, but did you have any thought about that with doing the short itself?
Well, what I did do with the short, because I didn't have a co-writer, I wrote
Mm,
the script myself. But what I did do was I spoke to um, people I knew who had been in the situation that I was describing. And I also spoke to an LGBT support group called Belong To in Dublin, in Ireland, to get feedback from them on the script and to ensure that what I was doing wasn't misrepresenting but also that it would actually be helpful. Because when you're doing something like this, you don't want it to be counterproductive. You don't want it, but you really do want it to be a positive force, you know. So I spoke to belong to a woman called Manina in there who's just brilliant, works with kids all the time. And I also spoke to, when we got to the stage of actually filming it, spoke to the actors involved, because a lot of them are queer and a lot of them had that perspective and a voice, particularly where when we were working in rehearsals, one of the first things I said to them was, don't take the text as set in stone, you know, the dialogue particularly.
Mm.
Rephrase it, say it the way you'd say it. The sentiment, yes, but how would you say it? And Dean in particular, who played Simon, was fantastic in that respect, because he spoke with a level of authenticity that I just couldn't have brought to it, you know. So I did have many resources available to me, and as a filmmaker, you've got to be open to collaboration. It's such a collaborative medium. You've got to be open to that, but sometimes it's not always there. You got to go and hunt it down. You got to go looking for it. So yeah, that was with the short film. That was the approach. And with the feature, I knew it was going to be a much bigger kind of a gig. So I would need somebody a bit more involved from that perspective.
Mm. Okay. Awesome. Now, Amy's sitting there, you know, being real polite and everything, but Amy-Joyce, like, you know what I mean? What was it like from your point of view? You know, firstly working on the short and then finding out that it's been turned into a feature and you're actually coming back. There's a lot of times when something then gets turned into, you know, the bigger thing, you know, it gets recast. So, you know, how did you feel about this whole thing?
Yeah, it was a really interesting journey, because when did we film the short? I think 2016. So for film, unlike say a TV series or theater where you're playing a character for much longer stretch of time, with film you kind of, you show it's quite condensed. Even a feature is often, you know, like an indie feature would be 5-week shoot or so. So even if you're the protagonist, it's still a very condensed block of time. And then you know, when it's released, you might do a bit of promo, but you kind of leave that character behind. But it was really interesting to pick it up again, and Katie and Graham developed the script over, I think it was over a year and a half. So we did a lot of cast read-throughs and workshops and rehearsals with the principal cast who were in the short, who carried over. So we were actually involved in the script development of the characters as they did expand the world. So it was a really fun hybrid, I suppose, between maybe a more long-running format like theater and film. And I loved just, even though it's a subplot, but just sort of representing that more adult LGBT experience, because the main plot is, of course, this coming of age and coming out. But I loved that subplot with the relationship with Celine and the question of maybe parenthood for a queer couple, and just sort of just adding a little more layers to the world in that way.
And what about, you know, being given the freedom to add to the script, right? To add to your character and say things in a way that you feel, you know, your character would say it. How is that as an actor? Because I imagine, you know, you don't always get that opportunity.
Yeah, no, that's true. Certainly with theater text, it would be much more fixed, the dialogue.
Yeah.
It's what it is. You can have with contemporary film, you can get that flexibility. It depends on the individual writer director and how rigid they are, you know. Like Aaron Sorkin, I believe, doesn't let you change a word, but you know, so there is a lot of we were allowed to say in rehearsals, particularly once it was set, we tried to sort of stick to the script for shooting, but once in rehearsals or the script development, we were allowed to paraphrase. For me, I actually ended up, rather than adding to, stripping back a lot, because I think the original scene with Oonagh and Lily where they first go to the nightclub, there was kind of almost a 3-page monologue for Oonagh, and I was like, this is almost too much of a wordy soapbox, and can I strip this back? And can we say this non-verbally in the dynamic between the two characters? And so that was actually, I think, more potent by stripping it back a little bit. So, but it's a really rewarding thing to be involved, I suppose, in the development of a script in that way and workshop it.
Yeah. Like, how did you draw upon to get into that character? You know what I mean? What references do you use for Oonagh?
I have a lot of personal connection to the material for Oonagh, particularly so the short, her role in the short was a cafe rather than a nightclub, but it was pretty much that scene, that big duologue where when she first meets Lily and takes her under her wing and gives her that kind of sort of call to step into her power and own her identity, and that's kind of the core of who Oonagh was. So I'd already played that in the short, but there was, I suppose, more of who is she, and you're bringing that to it. But I had my own experiences of being bullied in school, and my own journey through the dark night of the soul that Oonagh has had and come out the other side as an adult. And I've also taught younger actors doing screen training, so I could bring a lot of that kind of dynamic and experience into the role.
Okay. Right. It's your second collaboration with Graham, right?
Yeah, second feature, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Feature,
yeah. So, like, are you do you have an understanding of what each other want now at this point, do you think?
Yeah, they were very different projects. The first one was a romantic comedy in London and completely different genre and character. But yeah, we have a very good working shorthand, and yeah, we've also done a TV 2-parter as well together. So yeah, I would say I do. I actually had, Graham used to run a really big writers, directors, actors hub called the Attic Studio in Dublin, which is where we first would met in the mid-2000s, and it was a collective with over 1,000 members. So you had writers like Irvin Welsh and Dean Kavanagh, and really people who went on to become big Irish directors and writers, and they would workshop their early drafts of projects and then have actors get up and do live reads. And I did loads of those as an actor. And I even directed for the first time a play that went on to be produced, and I actually was cast in. So it was, he's very much an actor's director and really works on kind of allowing the actor to find the character and the performance, I think, by asking questions rather than dictating, do the, I've worked with directors who might be like, okay, and then the camera's going to do this, so turn, and we want to tear when the light is here, hit that mark. And it's very didactic in that way. And Graham's very much more asking questions to sort of let it unfurl.
Right. Interesting. Graham, so where does that style come from? Where did you kind of find your directing voice?
It's so, again, as Amy-Joyce mentioned, I had set up the Attic Studio, which had been going for, even before myself and Amy-Joyce met there, had been going for a long time. And it was out of a desire to connect with people. I come from a very working class background and would not have had access to the upper echelons of the film industry or the arts community. And I knew a lot of people like myself, actors, writers, directors, producers. So we kind of set this thing up, the Attic Studio, as a way to jam, as a way to get together. And, you know, I always thought musicians were lucky that they could get together and rehearse and play music. And we didn't have an opportunity to really do that, filmmakers. But it would be nice to set something up where you could you could set up a kind of a sessions where you could jam. And that's what we did. And it really, my style came from experience, from doing it at the kind of the grassroots level, with actors on the way up. And then as time progressed, we would be joined by people who had been more established. And you would see so many different approaches to it from different directors, from different actors, and how it all has to blend and combine into something cohesive. And for myself, I suppose it's an extension of my personality, where I like to observe, watch, and not get in the way, but steer rather than, directing, or as Amy-Joyce said, dictating choices, kind of support people in coming to their choices, enabling people to become collaborators on a project. And invariably, when I took that approach, I found it was more satisfying for me, and it helped the work get better. The work that resulted from it was better because of that approach. And also I studied with, there was a great organization in Dublin called Screen Training Ireland, and I used to bring great filmmakers over to talk to us. And I studied with a woman called Judith Weston on that. And her approach is very similar to what I would do. And then just reading and, watching interviews and listening to DVD commentaries with directors and how they approach things. But mainly it was just trying it and seeing what worked, seeing what felt right, seeing what felt good, and seeing what made the work better. And it kind of just organically evolved over time like that.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's always interesting to hear about how people get their influences, and because everyone does it differently.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the other thing about film, is that you've got all of these different, like, as a filmmaker, you very rarely, as a director, get to see other directors direct, other than in behind the scenes stuff, but that's heavily curated. And they choose what to show you. They don't show the arguments. They don't show unless it's kind of leaked from the set. So one of the things I did as a young filmmaker as well was I offered my services a lot of the time for free as an EPK videographer. The electronic press kit, where you'd go behind the scenes and film behind the scenes. And if you did it right, they would forget you were there. But you were capturing everything, and you were seeing everything. And a lot of the time you'd see what was working, but you'd also see what didn't work. And you'd kind of know when people had their backs up and when they weren't happy. And you try and analyze that and figure out why. So I guess experience is the key. I'm trying to gain as much experience as a young filmmaker to figure out how other people do it, and then use your own instincts to determine what works best for you.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting approach. I think, a lot of people looking to get into the industry, that's something they, might want to think about doing.
Yeah, and also take as many roles as you can on a set. I've held a boom pole, I've got the coffee, I've done pretty much everything you can do. And if you do that, like, I've lit stuff, I've been a cinematographer on projects, I've been an editor. It kind of coaches you in terms of the language of it, the language of each department, and also what's possible. Yes. I remember working with a cinematographer on my first feature, Anton, back in 2007. And he came up to me the first day and he said, I can't really pull the rug from under you, can I? I can't tell you if something is possible or not possible because you've lit stuff before. And I said, yeah. And he said, so basically you'll know if I'm bullshit. And I was like, yeah. So if you know how to do a thing, even if you're not a master of that aspect of it, it gives you the language, and it gives you an ability to converse with the people who have mastered that aspect.
Yes.
In a way that will help communication,
Yeah, no, I think that's true in every single thing that
Mhm.
you should, look to gain that knowledge. I've everywhere I've worked, I've looked to when I've been managing things, I've looked to work in all the departments.
Mm.
So I know how long it takes things to do. When I was a supervisor at a cinema, and I worked on a box office, in the concessions, I ran the
Yeah.
floor, I did projection. There's then, right? How long it should take to serve and how long to do tickets and things like that. And because a lot of times we were understaffed, right? So you'd have managers go, "Oh, they're so lazy." I'm like, no, 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 they're just understaffed, right?
Yeah.
They're doing as much as they can do because because you've done that work.
Well, that's it. And you wouldn't know that if you hadn't done it.
Exactly, yeah. But I think of something you said. It's it's finding your own voice, right? It's doing things in the way in which you do them. But then in when you think about that, right? It's when you have your script and you're looking for people to bring an authenticity to it. Like, do you feel sometimes though that might be their authenticity, but it's not everyone's authenticity? You know what I mean? Because everyone does things differently. Everyone has a different experience, right? Like, I mean, probably everyone's coming out story is different. It's like everyone's first kiss is different, right? Like, it's always different.
Yes.
So I think what I might go, oh, let's change this because no, I remember it more like that,
Mhm.
right? It's Amy-Joyce had a completely different experience. Katie had you had a
Yeah.
completely different. So it's just like finding
And
that balance. How do you know what I mean,
well,
work with that?
that is one of the big challenges. You cannot, with a film or with any kind of artistic endeavor, you cannot be all things to all people,
Mm,
and you can only represent, like in effect, like okay, it's a more of an ensemble cast than the short was. Let's say
yeah.
you have more perspectives, but you can only represent a singular perspective in terms of your main character, a singular experience, and this is where I leaned very heavily on both the actors and on Katie, because there were experiences in there that I could relate to very directly. And there were experiences in there that were completely alien to me.
Mm,
So I had to find the balance between what was authentic to my experience and felt right to me, and then listening to what my collaborators were saying, whoever they were. And that's across the board: actors, crew, anybody. Like crew members would say, there was a great example of this there's a scene where Lily and Violet come together in the locker room in the school.
yeah.
And there's a moment where Lily puts her hand up Violet's skirt, and it was the way it was being done on set was being done in such a way that Violet stops it, and then Lily kind of pushes into it, leans into it, and Violet allows it. But our cinematographers, the Ray sisters, Austin and Weston Ray, they're both young women, incredible cinematographers, but they had a perspective I didn't have, and they took me to one side in that moment and said, we think it would make more sense for Violet to stop her, and then for Violet to be the one who continues, who moves Lily's hand. And it was like an explosion went off in my head. And
Yeah.
I went, oh my God, in retrospect, I'm such a dunderhead not to have thought of that. But you got to be open to that collaboration. You got to be open to hearing that voice and hearing that different perspective, as long as it doesn't clash with the overall. Do you know what I mean? So it's having the confidence to say, I have a vision for this piece and I know what I want to do with it, but I can take input and I can say, does that work in the overall? And if it does, do that. You
Mm,
know, and it's it's just trust at the end of the day, trusting that these people who are bringing these thoughts to you are doing it out of a genuine desire to make the piece better. And invariably it gets better. It becomes more than the sum of its parts, if you allow for that.
Yes. Yeah. No, and I think that's a great example, you know what I mean? Because I mean, that scene would play completely differently if done in that first way.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's a really good example of great collaboration and being open to that collaboration. Yeah. Like, what was the thing, Graham, that made you want to tell a story about, LGBT community? Like, out of all the stories you could tell, why was this the one that you felt you wanted to bring to the screen?
It goes back a long way. When I was a kid, I was bullied quite a bit. And it was, I kind of suffered in silence, as a lot of people do, and a lot of it was because I was quiet and I preferred the company of girls, which at the time was kind of taken to mean you were gay, when you're young and you're supposed to be playing football and hanging out with the lads, and
it's so weird, right? Because
really
there's a point where if you hang around with a certain group, you're this, and then just a couple of years later, like that's the thing to hang, like, you know what I mean? Or it just having a certain group of friends means you're a certain. It's so crazy when you look back at it and you just think, why?
How does it make sense? Does it, and how? But it is. So it was a case that I was being bullied when I was a kid, and I got to a stage in my life where I was reflecting, I was looking back, and I was, thinking about maybe having a family at some stage, and thinking about, well, what would I pass on? What would I say about that time? So I started to come up with an idea for a story about bullying, and then a friend of mine, Eamon Farrell, had written a story during the marriage referendum. A Facebook post about his experience being a young gay boy in Dublin and how difficult it was and how other he had been made to feel. And it resonated with me. It really connected with me in terms of feeling different, feeling other than the norm. And it was an amalgamation then. The story was an amalgamation of Eamon's story and my story. And then I had been talking to Amy-Joyce about, she had gone to a seminar that a casting director that she'd worked with, Debbie McWilliams, had done. And Debbie McWilliams was talking about an initiative from Gina Davis, the actress Gina Davis in Hollywood, where they were trying to get screenwriters to look at their scripts and find characters that were male and ask themselves, could that character be a female? And if they could, and it didn't change the narrative, flip it. And I looked at the story I was writing and I went, you know what? That would make sense as a female character being bullied. And it would actually allow me to explore different elements, particularly in terms of being a father to a young girl. Again, at the time I didn't have kids, but I knew I wanted to. So it was something I wanted to explore. And really, it was just finding a vehicle to communicate to young people what I wished someone had said to me when I was that age. And the scene with that Amy-Joyce plays as Oonagh talking to Lily it's the Panty Bar in Dublin in the feature film, and it was a cafe in the short film. But that scene is basically everything I wished someone had said to me when I was around that age. And that became the fulcrum, the kind of the center point of the short film. And then in the expanded world, it became a kind of a tentpole scene as well. So it kind of came from that. And it really was just, I suppose, trying to put something good out into the world. And thinking about who in our society are the most vulnerable you know, and at the time the marriage referendum was ongoing. And even though it passed, there were huge swathes of the country that voted against gay marriage, and it boggled the mind. Why? Do you know what I mean? Why do you give a shit what other people do with their lives? Why do you think you should be the one to decide for someone else? I could not understand it. So it was, you know, an element of anger in there as well, that is the way of the world, that is the way of things, and an attempt in some small way to address it.
Yeah, I mean, I think whenever there's change, right? Like, I think people think, oh, the next day everything is great, right? Like, oh, now this has passed. Everything. I remember at work one day, and it was after Obama got elected in, and someone said, "Well, racism's dead." And I'm just like, what are you talking about? Like, what's wrong with you? You know what I mean? It's just like suddenly the racists are like, oh, what are we doing?
Yeah.
We shouldn't be racist anymore.
But that's like, I mean, I think maybe Katie, you could talk to this, because we've spoken about it before, about how the marriage referendum was a pivotal turning point. It changed things, but on another level, it didn't.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I mean, I'm 34 now, so I was of the age, like I was in my very early 20s when the referendum passed. So I obviously did not have marriage on my mind, you know, but it affected everybody so much more than we expected. You know, I can remember sitting on the couch. I had one shoe on, one shoe off when my home county lit up green. County Kerry, like it's a beautiful scenic county. We filmed Star Wars there, can I just say? But it's not as up to speed as we'll say Dublin or some of the more urban areas, you know. And I burst into tears, and I couldn't work that day. I couldn't eat. I couldn't do anything. It meant so much to me. Even in my own family, you know, we all ended up having these discussions that we didn't expect to have. Like, my siblings are 24 years younger than me, and they were being christened around the time of the referendum. And I had a badge, a yes badge on my coat. And one of the babies grabbed the badge, and my grandmother asked me what it was. And she said, "Oh no, oh no." And I was very hurt, because my Nana is one of my best friends. I love her so much. And things were a little bit icy between us for, you know, a couple of weeks. And she rang me the day that the referendum results came out. And she just said, "I want you to know I voted yes because I love you, and I want you to stay here, and you're part of my family." It was the most moving thing we've ever had. The two of us cried together on the phone. I've never cried with her before. You know, the only other time I've seen her cry was when my granddad died. And it was, in a way, it was her telling me, like, "I know I pushed you, but I was wrong," you know. And to have those nuanced discussions, you know, it's the same as a lot of the nuance in who we love. What's not important, or what should be less important, is, you know, the violence and the bullying and everything. What people should take away from who we love is the gestures of goodwill and the support. Like, you've got some minor enough characters, even in the school, who run after Lily outside the locker room and say, "Are you okay?" And she pushes them away, and that's fine. But it's still a minor moment where someone says, "You're important. You did not deserve that. I'm sorry this is happening." And for every single instance of someone being bullied or rejected, whether it's at home in private, which people don't see, or publicly in school, unfortunately, as happens quite often, you need about 6 or 7 more people reinforcing positive notes for it to sink in, you know? Even in retrospect, looking back at my own childhood, like, I didn't have a good relationship with my parents. You know, she was my first bully, my mother. And so when I went to school, people didn't realize I was already worn down. I didn't have it in me to take it. But it was only in my 20s and 30s when I reconnected with some of my schoolmates in college, or running into them in bars or whatever. I got a lot of apologies, actually. Unexpectedly, people reflected on their own behavior. And so I suppose the question is, like, the referendum caused so much discussion. I think people in the kind of the mid, you know, like 2015, 2016, people reflected on their behavior, I think, in a way that they wouldn't have if that referendum hadn't happened. And I think that's what I would love to see now, with people, like a wider audience, getting to see who we love. I hope that lots of young queer people see this film. I hope a lot of bullies see it as well, and look back and think how they treated each other in school, and how they could jump in, even if you're on public and you're on like a bus or something, you know, like Simon's father is a lot of the time, and he says, do you want to get off, to two guys who are hassling another fella. It just takes 20 seconds and it can literally change someone's day. It can change someone's life to have people stand up for them.
That's really true. And I think it's interesting you pointed out those different situations, because the friends, like the girls that come after Lily to ask if she's okay, we see them at the beginning, they're laughing along with everything that's happening. But I think sometimes when people in those groups, like, you go into that weird chameleon mode. You know what I mean? Where people try and fit in. They'd be like, oh, everyone's laughing, I'll laugh. But then when they think about it and they see an escalation, then they're like, no, that's not cool. You know what I mean? But sometimes it's easy to judge people on a quick reaction, because it's not always their true reaction. You know what I mean? And it's like with the dad, like you can look at him and be like, you know what I mean? He's a bit of a Luddite, but you can see that he does love Simon. It looks like he has a difficulty in fully showing it at times, you know? And I thought that was an interesting aspect of the film, where there is that nuance in people's reactions and the way they handle certain situations, you know?
Yeah, and it is something that we were conscious we wanted to do as well. Like, we wanted to give a space to the allies, or to people who could be potential allies. And we wanted to show particularly young men that they don't have to fall in with, you know, the gang, that they can be, without it being a huge thing, without it being life-changing, that they can just calmly and gently say no. Do you know what I mean? And we had the character of Paul, who was played by Daniel Mahon in it, who's Lily's friend, who fancies her at the start.
Yeah.
And then later on, you know, he says, can't we still be friends? It was important to me that we reflect that identity as well, or that experience as well, because we did want to show young guys that, you know, here's an option for you. You know, that you don't have to just be one thing or the other. You know, there's a kind of a whole gray area there as well. And it was, you know, with the dad and with people are very reactive, as you say, but reflection takes time. And with reflection, people can change.
That, yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. You know, and I think, you know, as Katie found that school friends apologized for their actions. And I mean, you know, in one regard, it's like, well, it didn't make the, you know what I mean, the experience doesn't change the experience, but at least you can see someone has grown. You know what I mean? I think that's always a good thing. It's always a weird situation I find, like with school, that we're not taught how to interact with each other.
Yeah.
You know, all the things we're not taught that. So you get people a lot of times mirroring how their parents act, you know what I mean? Rather than like who they are, you know, because they haven't found who they are yet, you know, but we're not told, you know, we should communicate in a certain way. We treat each other in a certain way, you know, it's not a lesson.
But I do think that a lot of the time, particularly for myself as a young person, that's where art comes into it. You know, film, music, books, anything at all that helps you to understand something. You know, if you don't have a strong parental voice, or if you don't have a strong you know, mentor there to kind of guide you through that, you find it where you can. And nowadays, obviously, it's different for young people nowadays. The internet is the real kind of conduit to information for young people, and that's unchecked and unfiltered, and it's dangerous. You know what I mean? So I do think that we as filmmakers have a responsibility when we're putting these things in front of people, that we're conscious of that. We're conscious of that role. We're conscious of that kind of responsibility that we have. And you know, when we were making this film, one of the things I thought about a lot is, who do I want to watch this film? Who do I want to see this film? And what's the point of it? And it's okay. It's not the most original kind of narrative in terms of, you know, it's a coming out story and it follows the tropes. But there's a scene in the film where Alison McGurr, the actress who plays Celine, says to Lily, "Unfortunately, it's nothing new." And Lily says of her experience, and Lily says, "It is to me." And to me, that's very important, that to every young person who sees a film, or it could be the first time they have seen this narrative, and it's got to be authentic to them, and it's got to say something to them. That was more important to me than thinking about who's going to watch it and who's going to, you know, comment on it and all of that. It's who am I speaking to? And broadly, it was the two groups. It was young people who are having a hard time, and their parents. You know, they're the two groups that I really want to see this and be able to use it as a springboard to a conversation, to having a talk, to being able to say, okay, we watched this film. There's that scene about self-harm. There's that scene about the older guy being a predator to the younger guy. There's this, how do you feel about that? You know what I mean? And it means if you have that as a frame of reference, you don't have to bring it up in an awkward way. You know what I mean? So my greatest hope is that older generations and younger generations will see it and be able to use it as a way to talk, to communicate.
Yeah, I mean, how have you seen any of that? Right? Because
it's so
in the world now, right?
Yes, and the film is out there, and we are getting feedback from people, and we are hearing great stories about. Most of what we get back is, I feel seen. I haven't seen myself. Young Irish queer kids saying, I haven't seen myself on screen in that way. I've seen other representations, but not in this way. A lot of people are reacting to the anger in it, that it's angry about the status quo, that the status quo is not the way the world should be. I did one of the best things that happened with the short film was I got an email from a guy who had seen the film on an airplane flying, I think, from Australia to the UK. And his sister's child was transitioning and was having a really hard time. They identified as female. They were born, you know, assigned male at birth, and having a hard time. And the sister particularly was having a very hard time understanding what was going on. And he said to me in this email, I think if she saw your film, it might help. So I sent him a link to the film, and I said, just send that on to your sister. And he got back in touch with me, and he said they watched it together, and they both broke down in tears after watching it. And I broke down reading his email. Do you know what I mean? Because it did what it was supposed to do. And even for that one person to have had that experience, it's worth it. You know, all of the hassle and the pain and the torture of getting a film made. If you connect to one person, if you have one person say it made a difference, then it's worth it. You know, and that's, you know, we hopefully, like, the film will exist beyond us, and hopefully it will continue to do that apart from us. You know, we've put it out in the world, myself, Katie, Amy-Joyce, all the people who worked on it put our all into it. And then you send it out in the world and it takes on its own life. And it is what it is to whoever it goes to, you know. So we, in a way, we can't control that. But that's one of the beautiful things about art, is it's there for people to take ownership of, you know.
Yeah. I mean, how has your experience been with the role of Oonagh, Amy-Joyce? You know, like you said, you the short was 2016, and then, you know, takes it a few years later, you do the film, and then it's finally out in the world, you know?
Yeah. How's my experience been with regard?
With the character, and like people, you know, approached you about, you know, your portrayal and how, you know,
Yeah,
how it
we
meant
did a lot of festival screenings initially before it picked up because it was an independent film. So we did a lot of festival screenings and Q&As. So that's where you get that direct kind of peer-to-peer feedback. And like Oonagh's a great character, and she's a lot of people. She has the benefit of being, you know, when you're the support character, you can be a bit funnier, or you don't have to be quite as earnest as the protagonist who's on their journey. So you know, it's actually a really good sort of role to inhabit, because you can, a lot of people enjoy that character in a way, and get a lot out of her. And you know, I've had it was tremendous fun for me to play. I was actually originally cast in the short as the teacher. And this role of Oonagh was written for an actress who's a friend of mine, fabulous actress called Mary Murray, who happened to be doing a play in New York at the time of the shoot and had to decline the role. And I read in, well, at the auditions, I asked Graham, could I play? Since he was like, oh, no, that's not your casting type, let's say. But I read in for 2 days at the auditions opposite all the young lads auditioning for Simon, and then Graham said, "Oh, actually, I think you could do Oonagh." So for me, it was a great journey, because it was also cast against type, shall we say? So I got to show, you know, TV and film casting, you're very much cast to type. In theater, you get to show your range a lot more, and I'm a theater trained actress, but it was a really great opportunity for me to get to play against type. And so a lot of people in the Irish industry who saw it really enjoyed that level of transformation, and were surprised. So it was very rewarding and fun role for me. So yeah, it's been a great journey. I feel very lucky.
Great stuff. And Katie, what about yourself? Have you had a lot of interactions about the film since it's been out?
Yeah, I have. I think like it's important to note, I can't remember if I said this before or not, but like at the stage where Graham approached me to potentially co-write the film, I was doing a lot of my own writing and realized I wanted to direct, but I hadn't done any of that yet. So Who We Love has come out for me at a time where like I'm just starting off. So it's very unusual for my age and the stage of career that I'm at to have a feature film out at all in the midst of my shorts, you know. So I'm still writing and directing my own short films, and I've got another one coming up in a couple of months. So it was odd, you know, people didn't know who I was before the film came out. And then with the timing of it, what happened was my first short film started filming the week before Who We Love, actually. So the two were going on at the same time. And then we were really lucky to have a lovely festival run with Who We Love, and my first film did well as well. So I went from being this kind of anonymous person who did interviews like this for a website and who did social media at events, to being a feature writer and a new director all at the same time. You know, and my other work has a lot of themes of sexuality and gender as well. So having Who We Love tethered to that really helped me to establish myself a bit more quickly, I think, than I would have had before. And it helped me get taken seriously as well, which is quite unfortunate. Like I said, it was quite unusual for someone like Graham to approach a new writer and give them, you know, such space and trust, you know what I mean, and actually listen to them. At the same time, it was unusual to be a new writer-director and also have a feature out at the same time. I do remember specifically in terms of Who We Love, being on stage at the Galway Film Fleadh, which is like one of the biggest festivals here in Ireland. It was our world premiere. And because we had just come back from the pandemic, we actually had an outdoor screening in like a field as opposed to a cinema. It was such good fun, but there was beanbags all over the place. And, you know, we felt like we were at a music festival. And initially I was like, oh no, like for once the weather's nice in Ireland. It's going to be too bright. No one's going to be able to see it. And Graham and I were a nervous wreck, and we had our headphones on. We kept checking, are people laughing? Are they laughing? And after the first 10 minutes, we're like, we're good. The crowd is liking this. And we got up and had a Q&A. It was my first time really speaking in public with the film. And all the shyness and the nervousness was just gone because we were all having such a lovely experience. But walking off the stage back into the crowd, a series of people approached us. One was a woman in her 60s, and she put her hand on my shoulder and said, "I raised my kids under Thatcher." And she started to break down and had to walk away. Another man approached me and said, "I was bullied." And he, like, I'm really short, I'm 5'2", and this was this really big man. And he put his arms around me and he just rested his head on top of my head and just cried. And he wasn't even there to see the film for himself. He was in it because his brother was acting in it. This is a straight man who wasn't expecting to connect with the film in that way. He was there to support his sibling. And I remember looking at the actor who played Julian, looking at his brother, thinking, what are you talking about? They had never discussed this as siblings, so far as I could see. And I ended up having a lovely time with them that evening. And to see that conversation inspired between siblings, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be really good. And that was screening number 1. And so I've got like 100 other stories like that, you know, for all the festivals that we got to do in person. But it was seeing people reacting, not in a way that we didn't expect, but in a way that they didn't expect. Because on the surface level, like, yeah, it's a coming of age film and it's about coming out and all the rest. But ultimately, it's about bullying and standing up for each other, and the ability that you have to do that. I think a lot of the time it doesn't occur to younger people to step in school and saying, what you're doing is completely inappropriate. That person doesn't deserve it. Stop. Like, how often did any of us hear that in school? I certainly didn't. You know, I had a sibling same age as me in school the whole way up. She never once stood up for me until years later. She was in a gay bar in Cork where we went to college. I don't know what she was doing in there because she's straight. But she saw one of the guys who bullied me in school with a pink tank top on a pole, and he was dancing like this. And she went up to him and she said, "Look at you. Do you know what you did to my sister?" And she said his face fell and said, "I'm really sorry. This guy was clearly closeted in school and took it out on me by bullying me constantly, and I was too shy to stand up for myself, you know?" But it's conversations like that happened at screenings, like from the perspective of people who are bullied, parents, people who have queer people in their lives. The unexpected responses were the warmest for me. I love being surprised by people in the same way as they were surprised by the film.
Yeah, I think it does hit broader demographics maybe than certainly the short, which was more aimed at that, you know, teenage, early 20s cohort. And I think the feature does subtly in a nuanced way, but it really does land with different demographics.
Yeah, no, that's great.
There was one, just to add one more, Kevin. There was a guy came up to me after we had a screening in Kerry at the Kerry Film Festival, and again, big guy, really big guy, kind of lovely fella, but he came up to me and his eyes were red raw after the screening, and I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, he said, I'm a dad. I have a daughter." And the scene where Lily's dad talks to her about the transition from being a girl to a woman and his role in that, he said it cut me to the core. And I like he said, I can't speak. And he walked away, but it had, affected him deeply in the way that you just hope when you put these things out into the world that it will do that, and if people are open to it, then it seems like it does,
Yeah, no, definitely. Oh, I do need to ask you about something, right? There's the thing that happens to Simon towards the end of the film, but then later in the film we got Simon running around like just straight out of the hospital, like
yeah. The idea with that was, so I got run over when I was a kid twice.
Yeah,
hit by a car, and
same and a bus.
The first time it happened, I was knocked out cold. Bang. Woke up on the ground. I had been to the shops. I was in the Boy Scouts. We ran across the road to get sweets. Came back from the shops and bang, got hit by a car. Dragged down the road under the car. The whole thing had a big scar down my face. All of it. Woke up and said, "Where's my sweets?" First thing I could think of, right? Where's my sweets? And they had to go and get the bag of sweets. Second time I got hit by a car was like what happened with Simon, but I got hit going. It was one of these lollipop lady crossings
Yeah.
at a school, one of them. And the lollipop lady went to walk out, and I ran in front of her, and a woman tried to break through and get through before the lollipop lady, and just bang, hit me again, up in the air, down the road, broke my foot, didn't know I had, and I ran home. And the woman had to follow me home in the car because I just got up and ran. And again, it's taking these little things from your own life and putting them in, you know what I mean? And I think with Simon, with that, what we were thinking, like there's an adrenaline shot you get from it, but also it's just his innate character that he keeps moving no matter what. He keeps moving and he keeps going, and he's more about Lily than he is about himself in most of the scenes we see him in. You know what I mean? And I just, a lot of that comes from Dean, who played Simon as well. It's just in him, in his character. You know, he's bubbly and he's energetic. He has a lot of depth, but he also just has this kind of puckish nature to him, you know. So yeah, and it's you know, it's sometimes you look at things and go, how realistic is that? But at the end of the day, we're telling a story.
Oh no, that's cool. I just feel, let me ask you about that.
Yeah.
Oh man. All right, guys. Well, now this is out in the world. What's next?
Well, it's like anything, you're kind of developing the next thing and hoping the next thing will land. You know, in this industry, it's very hard to say this is the thing I'm doing next, because you've so many plates in the air. You're spinning plates, and it's whichever one of them kind of lands and gets the funding or gets the support or gets whatever it is, you know. So for me, I've just got several projects kind of bubbling away in the background. I'm working on a documentary at the moment that's got a bit of momentum behind it now. It's about the sport camogie that's been played in Who We Love.
Right.
It's about you know, I live in a small town in Ireland, and Gaelic games are such a huge part of the fabric of life here, but it's not really been explored cinematically. So I wanted to bring it to the big screen in a way that, you know, that highlighted the sport and the culture, and also the, you know, the small town that I live in, the kind of the what's good about it, you know. So that's the thing that I'm putting most of my effort into at the moment, but always with these several other things kind of bubbling away in the background, you know.
Okay. I have to say, that's the first I've heard of that, because as a kid, you might have, there was a show, Transworld Sport, that would play on I think it's Saturday morning, and they would show Gaelic football as part of Transworld Sport. So I knew about Gaelic football, but I'd never heard of camogie.
Yeah, it's a like in Ireland, it's huge. It's like people build their lives around this sport, but outside of Ireland, it's not very well known. I once saw there's a Jason Statham movie where he beats a guy up with a hurl, which is the stick that they use, and the male equivalent is called hurling. And he explains to the guy he's about to beat up, he says hurling is like a cross between hockey and murder. And that's what it is, you know. It's basically kids with sticks trying to kill each other, you know? And there's a ball in there somewhere. So yeah, it's the fastest grass-based sport in the world, hurling and camogie. But not too many people know about it. So yeah, that's just trying to raise awareness of it, I suppose, in a way.
That will be really interesting. That will be really interesting. Okay. What about yourself, Amy-Joyce?
Well, Katie and I actually collaborated on another project. Katie wrote and directed an Irish language short film, which the script won a few awards, called Focal Balia Cree, which means Words Home Heart. So I'm in that, and she's in post-production on that at the moment. And I have a couple of other actually Irish language projects. So an Irish language feature called Bócha, which means drowned. I think that should be in cinemas this year. So that'll be coming out. And another one called Cugger, which is whispers. So a lot of Irish language stuff I've actually been working on recently, and I wrote and directed a short film as well called Dive, which I am in post-production on and will release this year on the festival circuit.
Ah, fantastic. Okay. And now, so Katie, as well as this Irish language, sure, have you got anything else that you're working on?
Yeah, so Focal Boiler is in post-production, as Amy-Joyce said. I've got a Screen Ireland funded short. It's a focus short called The Quiet Ocean, written by Barry Smith and produced by Fiona Kinsella. So I'm in pre-production on that right now, and we're going to be filming that in March. I'm in development with Wild Atlantic Pictures. I'm adapting a children's book called The Deepest Breath by Meg Gretton. So that's a feature film I'm working on. I've also recently started to develop another feature based on my own childhood called Before, During and After. And I've just started developing a TV series as well called Strand Road with another Irish writer called Lindsay Sedgwick. So a lot in development. I did multi-camera training direction for TV as well. So once The Quiet Ocean is done and Focal Boiler is finished, I'll be making my full-time jump to feature and TV work. So maybe hopping over to the UK for a little bit of that, hopefully later this year.
Ah, fantastic. Fantastic. Oh, can I ask you a quick question about Fuca Valley Queen?
Focal Boiler Creed. Yeah, close enough.
Okay.
Good stuff.
I'm terrible with pronunciation. I apologize. Have you done the subtitles yet for it?
I have. Yeah.
Okay, because the one thing I always have difficulty with is I've got bad eyesight, so I cannot see subtitles in the cinema. So I would have to watch it at home. But a lot of times people don't put a solid background behind the subtitles. So you can lose the subtitles in the background of whatever's on screen.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fair point. I actually, in my day job, I produce animation for a global learning company which does educational content for the States. So we do a lot of animation and live action work for that. But I'm a producer / writer on that. And so because for educational stuff, you have to be aware of children that have issues like double vision, color blindness, hearing impairment, that kind of thing. So it's called WCAG compliance, where you do color contrast on things. Actually, the best subtitle color that you can do for a film is actually yellow with a black stroke, which no one ever does.
Yeah.
So I've looked up the standards for Netflix and I'm adapting them as well. So it doesn't really make a difference which scene you're going to be in. And Focal Boiler Creed, you can read the Yeah, good question though. I think compliance is important, particularly with Irish language, because like on Colleen Keown or The Quiet Girl, which came out a couple of years ago, was just such a triumph for Irish language. You've got so many people making them now. And I think we are running the risk if people, it's like when people film something beautiful and they don't pay attention to the sound design. With foreign language films, if you don't pay attention to the subtitles, you're kind of kicking yourself in both feet, you know?
Mm-hmm. And there's a huge, it's a part of the process that is neglected. But there are, if you're clever about it, there are opportunities to do something. Like nowadays, a lot of things are very widescreen, you know what I mean? So you've got that bit of black space above and below that you can put your subtitles in that, if it's cropped that way, you know what I mean? You've also got the likes of, like if you look at Ridley Scott, he can get quite creative with subtitling. Now, it's only in foreign language parts for English releases, but he'll have words come up in a part of the screen that's dark. You know what I mean? As opposed to just in the standard down the bottom. You also can, you know, with TV, a lot of the time, they have the black bar behind it, but aesthetically, that's not the nicest way to present your subtitles. So it's a whole consideration in and of itself as a filmmaker that, you know, it's part of the process. And like more and more and more people nowadays watch films with the subtitles on for various reasons. Like, I know even myself, I'm you know, the older I get, the harder it is for me to hear what's going on. And sometimes if I don't have the subtitles, I'm like, what's happening? You know, it's like, you can't. I remember the writer of a Gabriel Byrne TV series, the guy who wrote it, watched it with his wife at home. It was a BBC TV series. And he said they had to turn on the subtitles because it was so mumblecore The actors were mumbling their way through the lines so much. He, the writer, couldn't hear it. And, you know, they were leaning into the telly and they went, just put the subtitles on, you know. So it's definitely an element of the process. And even on our phones now, people will watch stuff on the phone, but they'll have it mute on the bus.
Yeah.
So they'll, you know, all of that. So you need to figure out ways to do that are, one, more creative, but two, more effective.
Yeah. I just wish more people thought about it, because there's so many things that I just can't watch because of the subtitles.
Yeah, no, it's a big thing. I mean, they're like, Netflix will give you the option to adjust the type of, like, the subtitles. If you go into their menus, you can make them bigger, you can put like, you know, but it shouldn't really be on the viewer, should it?
Well, I don't mind if you can alter it, but sometimes they're hard coded, so you can't change anything. And that's where it gets really you know,
tricky. No, 100%. And even just in terms of the size of it, if they're so small, again, sometimes I find myself squinting and leaning in, you know. It's like, should I be doing that, or should I be watching the film, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, hey, as you've got a background in it, Katie, I look forward to watching your film. I probably won't try and pronounce it again because I don't want to embarrass myself. But yeah, I look forward to checking it out. And yeah, all of you, man, when your new projects are ready to drop, please stop by and we can have another conversation.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, this has been lovely, Kevin. Really lovely having a chat with you.
I really appreciate your time, guys. Really do. So thank you so much.
Thanks a million. Nice talking to you.
All right. Well, I hope even more people find and connect with your film, because it's yeah, I think that's the beauty of storytelling. You know, being able to connect with people and resonate in those different ways, right? That, you know, they might not be finding in just everyday life. So hey, congratulations on the film, and I look forward to seeing your future works.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Bye.
Take it easy. Bye.